There it is. Okay, cool. So I don't think that either one of you guys that are here today have really worked with me much in the past other than just kind of seeing me in passing. I'm Josh Madej. I have my bachelor's in general studies from Missouri Western in music tech, theater, and cinema. I've been working in AV for about 16 years, and I am our sound consultant here at Olathe West. I kind of got my start because I was with the crew that installed the AV systems in the performing arts spaces, including like the band room and the orchestra room and the theater. And then we have some of my badges of my alphabet soup down there at the bottom. Before we get started, just because a lot of what we do in the sound world is a lot of hunting for sounds and trying to find things that already exist that fit our needs, it's important that we talk a little bit about copyright, and we're only going to spend a couple of minutes here and then move on. But a few things that are important to know when you can use something that you just found on the internet, or just in general, when you can use anything. One is if you actually made it yourself from scratch using no other pieces that anybody else made, then it's your work, it's yours to do with as you please. Another is if you have the permission of the creator, which we call licensing. Sometimes you'll have to pay for that license, and sometimes they'll say, yeah, sure, go for it, whatever. Or if the work is in the public domain. And what we're going to get into what public domain means a little bit here in just a second. But there's also a few myths out there about copyright that if you aren't charging money, or if you only use a little bit, or if you put a disclaimer in the description, that suddenly you're free to use whatever you want in whatever way you want, and that's just not the case. There's actually a fairly long video by Tom Scott called YouTube's Copyright System Isn't Broken, the World Is. It's like 45 minutes long, but he digs really deep into a lot of this. But basically, suffice to say that when we're working on a show and we're out hunting for sound effects that we're going to use and we're going to play back for a public audience, we need to make sure that we actually have the correct rights to use everything that we do, because some of these rights holders are impressive in their ability to find you, even if you think that they're not going to be able to. Also, forgot to mention, at any point, especially while I'm in the slide deck here and I can't see you, if you've got questions at any point or anything that you don't understand, feel free to just unmute yourself and shout out any questions. Because sometimes I can move quick through these things and get a little wordy and maybe talk over heads. I am not afraid to go back. So when I said that we want to look for things that are in the public domain, what that means is either that their copyright has expired, or that the author has specifically said that anybody can use this work for whatever they want. Fun fact about copyright, because of the Disney Corporation largely, no copyrights since 1927 have expired. However, everything before 1927 has expired. And that's a long and drawn out story. But so anything that's older than 1927, you're free to use, or if the author has specifically said that anybody can use it, or, and this is an interesting one, any work created by a federal government employee in the course of their job, at least in the US, automatically their work is in the public domain. And what that means, if you stop and think about it, all NASA astronauts are federal government employees. Therefore, all of the photos that they take in space are automatically public domain, which is why it's so easy to get a hold of space photos. And then this is the last item on this. Another thing that we can look for as we're looking for assets is Creative Commons licenses, which doesn't replace copyright, but it's sort of a way... The people behind Creative Commons realized that copyright was kind of lacking, because all that really happens under copyright law in the US is that either a creator can completely give up their work to the public domain, or they can keep it under lock and key and only the people who they say are allowed to use it can use it. Creative Commons allows creators to put things out and kind of give more instruction on what they want done with their work. So like there's by attribution, which just means that you have to give credit to the creator. and let them know who made the original thing. Share alike means that, and all of these are different pieces that can kind of be put together in whatever order you want within a Creative Commons license. But share alike means that whatever you make using the thing that someone else made, you have to also put it out under the same Creative Commons license, saying that I used this thing by this creator, and now you can take my thing and do whatever you want with it. Non-commercial just means that you can't make money off of the creation. Non-derivative means that this is for like when you're looking for images for a website where you just need like woman looking pensively out the window and you just want to take that photo and use it as it is and put it on your website. You're allowed to do that. But under a no derivative license, you can't like cut it out and put it in a different scene or anything like that. And then CC0 is essentially public domain. And the Creative Commons website at creativecommons.org has more information about all of this, but they also have a search tool where you can go out. It doesn't do sound or video very well right now. It basically refers you out to other places. But at least for images, you can go on and you can say, like, I want images that are only licensed under CC0 and they're free to use, or like that are only by attribution. So like most of the images that I've used in my presentation today are all either CC0 or they're by attribution, and the ones that are by attribution, you'll notice have a caption on them, giving that appropriate acknowledgement. Some more information available. There's a YouTube channel called Lawful Masses with Leonard French. He's a copyright attorney who basically, most of what his channel is he looks at sort of high-profile cases and analyzes kind of what's going on in the trial. And sometimes most of the time it's like ongoing trials, but sometimes he'll look at historical things and talk about like what can we learn out of this, or when it's a current ongoing trial, he'll say like, he'll look at the documents that have been filed and analyze like, okay, this is the purpose of that document. Here's what both parties are trying to argue. And here's what happens next. And here's what I think is going to happen. And so you kind of get to see how all that works, and he's really good at explaining in very human terms sort of what it all means. And then that Tom Scott video. And I'll send Morris an email after this that has links to all of this stuff. So our next thing is the roles on the sound crew. There's 3 of them, at least the way that we do things. Everyone kind of has their own way. Some places are sound crew of 1, some take a whole army. We do it generally in about 3 roles, and some of them are duplicated. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to talk about these 3 roles, and then I'll kind of give you guys the option to see what we go deeper into, and we can chase rabbit holes as deep as we want to. So first off is kind of the head of the crew, the brains of the operation is the audio engineer. They control what the audience hears, so they take in all of the different signals from instruments in a musical, microphones from actors, all of the playback coming in, everything that you hear all comes in. They put the effects on it, they determine what happens to that signal from end to end, and then how it's ultimately heard by the audience. As well as controlling the monitors for the actors and for the orchestra. Then we have the show control specialists, who they put together the pre-recorded sounds and play them back during the show. They keep track of the cues in the book, they communicate with the stage manager, and sometimes we get into sending out control signals to other devices. So like one thing that we do at West is that all of the mic mutes and unmutes, during a normal show, Lauren doesn't actually drive those from the board. It's Haley sitting next to her who's just hitting go, because we've gone through the script and we've seen that, like, people come in and out in this order and in these groups, and they should do that the same way every show. And so therefore we don't really need to watch the stage and see who's coming in and who's going out, because we already know who goes in and who goes out. And if we need to adapt, then that's a different conversation. But for the most part, we don't have to keep track of those bazillion buttons, at least for that one little task. it can just happen semi-automatically that we have one person watching, and when groups come in, they hit a button and all those mutes come on. And when people leave, then they push the button again and all of those mutes turn off. And then sometimes we also work with, when we have video, then video is also run through the same system. And we've also been known to do a queue here and there. If we really want to synchronize with light crew, we can do the same thing with the lighting console. We can remotely fire queues from QLab. And the last role is the mic master, who in general is just in charge of the mics. They keep them maintained, they charge batteries, they keep them clean, they mic up actors before the show, they unmic actors after the show. They work with sound check, that if things aren't quite right, they make adjustments at that point, working with the audio engineer. And generally, in most places, they're also in charge of wireless frequency coordination, meaning that they control the frequencies of the mics and make sure that every mic is on its own frequency and that we're not impeding on like local TV stations and things like that. So here we have sort of our first sort of deviation point here. So what sounds the most interesting to everyone here so far between those three roles?
Probably the second one.
So
I don't know. It just seems cool to like run all of them. Yeah.
cool. Issa?
The first one.
All right, cool. Those two are my favorites too. And Morris, you're here. We don't have a lot of bodies in the room.
What's the question? Sorry.
So between the audio engineer, the show control specialist, and the mic master, who are you most interested in?
I probably the mic master because I'm no good at troubleshooting all the problems that happen.
Okay, so we got a vote for all three then.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna spend another brief moment back in the slide deck here, just to kind of go over some fundamental stuff, and then we're gonna look at some real world application. In all of this, especially when it comes to the mic master and the audio engineer, it's important for us to understand what sound actually is. And you may hear that it's vibrations and it's waves and like, but what does that actually mean? Well, sound travels as a wave, which is just like when you're in a stadium, you have the people doing the wave. When one person stands up, as soon as they see it, the person next to them stands, and it just travels down the line. Well, in sound, we have basically the same thing happening, except with instead of being people, it's with air molecules. So something is going to move, and that's going to create almost like this tiny little front of wind that pushes all the air next to it away. And those air molecules are going to bump into the air molecules next to them, and those are going to bump into the ones next to them. And this is just going to travel down the line. And then when the thing moves back, it pulls a vacuum, and that's going to suck the air molecules back towards it again. So this illustration that we've got here is what we would call a transient wave, meaning that it's just like a short blip. It happens one time. This is things like drums and clicks and pops and things like that. Most sounds that we hear are what we would call a periodic wave, where things wiggle back and forth this way. So you can think of it as like on a microscopic level, there's wind blowing one way, and then it blows back the other direction. And when that encounters something like your eardrum or the diaphragm of a microphone, that wind is going to blow and it's going to push it a little bit. And that's how we perceive sound, that's how we capture sound, that's how we record sound, is just by basically measuring this microscopic amount of wind and how much it pushes your eardrum or the microphone diaphragm. When something makes a sound, it radiates out in this like circular pattern. It's actually a sphere, but if we took this diagram and we put it out into 3 dimensions, it would basically look the same way. That it's just air molecules packing together and then rarefying. Rarefying meaning that they pull apart and they become more rare in that area. So, here is a question for you. True or false, do you think that all sounds follow the same patterns? I see a thumb.
False, probably. Yeah.
We're thinking no? Ooh.
I vote false.
Nah.
All right. Well, we're going to learn a thing today because they.
Uh-oh.
So, let's take something like a guitar string, for example. What it's going to do, it moves in what we call harmonics. So, the first harmonic, or what we call the fundamental, it's the lowest one, would be the string vibrating up and down across its whole length. But at the same time, it's also going to split in two. And those two pieces are going to move counter to each other. And then it's also going to break into 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth up to infinity. Well, the section that's split in half, it's going to move twice as fast as when it's the whole string because it's got half as much mass to move. And the same on up the tree. The one that's split in 3 is going to move 3 times as fast. The one that's split in 4 is going to move 4 times as fast. When you take all of these and you stack them up together, you get this kind of like floppy motion. And as it turns out, all things that vibrate and make sound naturally occurring follow this pattern. And it's always the multiples of the fundamental. So say that the fundamental is at 100 hertz, which is easy for math's sake, but it doesn't form a real note. So the fundamental would be 100 hertz, and that's what we perceive as the pitch of the note. So, like for example, the A above middle C is 440 hertz. But going back to our 100 hertz example for easy math, it's the harmonics are the multiples of the fundamental. So the fundamental is at 100, and then you would have harmonics at 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. So let's look at a real world copy of this, and let's make some sound. So what I've got set up here is just a whole bunch of sine wave generators. All sounds are made up of these sine waves. We'll keep the volume tame here because this gets really irritating if you don't. So this is A440. So this is what we perceive as the pitch of an A. Oh no, things really broke here. I'll just build it as I go. So the first fundamental is, or the first harmonic is double the fundamental, so from 440 to 880. Then the next one above that is going to be 3 times the fundamental, or 1320. And as we keep going, 1760. And you'll notice as I keep adding these, at first you hear that additional tone that's added onto the top, but then eventually it all starts to kind of morph together into the same sound. In fact, if I interrupt this even briefly and then put it back, it kind of starts to sound like an organ.
That's blowing my mind.
This is the thing that I didn't learn until I was in college, and I've heard so many people say that, like, this is the thing that blew my mind, like, my life was different after I knew this. I didn't hear things the same way anymore. Let's see. 3520. There's a reason why I cut this off at 10. Oops. As I'm having to build this as I go. Yeah, that's right. This is also why I leave myself the notes in the track names. Alright, so we got all of that built up together. Here's some other interesting things about this sequence. Let's build this up in reverse. I kind of like to spend some time on this just because it's new for just about everyone that sees it. And it's so fundamental to what we do in sound. So if I take these first 5 partials, if I build these in reverse where you can kind of hear the individual tones, these are the notes that make up a major chord. And this is the reason why our Western fundamentals about harmony are what they are, because if we start stacking notes up together, let's say, for example, let's take a fifth and a fourth, a fifth and a first, and then we'll add a third. This is a major triad. When we stack notes up together, where those harmonics line up with one another, it's because we're taking bits and pieces out of one note and they line up with what's in another note, and that sounds good to our ears. And then once they get up higher, they start to kind of go off the rails a little bit. They're not even in tune real notes. Something else kind of interesting is that your brain can actually do this math subconsciously. So say, for example, we have like really crappy speakers and you can't hear the low end and you can't hear what the fundamental is, but you can still perceive what the note is. I'm going to mute here and open up a few of these. So I'm missing these bottom 3 partials, meaning that I can't hear the fundamental. I shouldn't know what pitch this is. And yet, it doesn't sound great, but you can still tell that that's the original pitch, because your brain is looking at the gaps in between these notes and going, okay, if I keep following this sequence on down, then eventually we end up back at A440. So then we can take this idea and let's make some music with it. So here I have a sampler, and all that does is it takes a recording that's fed into it and lets me put it on a keyboard, and it can pitch shift it so that I can play it as an instrument. So I'm going to take in this signal that we've built up here. What? Yeah, that's looking better. Let's see. So then, how do we get other instrumental sounds? Even though every sound is made up of these same patterns, they're arranged in different ways and at different loudnesses in order to form different instruments. So let's take another example here. Let's turn off all of the even numbered ones. Well, now we have a clarinet. And if I take another sample here. If there was any question of whether I was playing that live. And we can also go through and we can change the weightings of these to make different sounds. And by going through and changing the volumes on these, what I'm doing is functionally the same, if I put all of these back, as an equalizer, which basically is just like when you're in your car, you know, you've got bass and treble. Well, that's what we would call a 2-band equalizer. What we have in the professional audio world is basically the same thing, but they are much fancier. Like in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bands that I can use. And so I get high, low, middle, 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 middle. And I can determine what parts of the middle I'm affecting, how much of it. We can cut things out. We can boost things up. I can chop off the top. I can boost the middle. We can make the bottom completely not exist. So, mind's blown? New information?
Yeah, I'm still not sure how you did it, but it's okay.
Very much so. Yes.
Where did I lose you, Riley?
Honestly, my own stupidity. I'm getting the hang of it. It's just still like, what?
And really, the math of it is not that important. Just kind of the idea that like it's the same pattern. So like, you know, if we're starting with a fundamental of 100 hertz, it's 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. If you start with 200, it's 200, 400, 600, 800, 1000, so on and so forth. They're always the same distance apart. And the fact that equalization is just changing the weightings of those frequencies. So we can take any sound that comes in and we can run it through an equalizer, and we're just taking whatever comes in through the microphone and we're just changing the weighting of those harmonics in the fundamental in order to make it sound better or more correct or what have you. So let's switch over to a different session file here. We'll take something that's familiar to, I think, everyone here.
That is Xanadu!
That's Xanadu! Goodbye, Father Zeus!
I figured we would all appreciate this throwback. So what I've got here is a multi-track recording, and what I mean when I say multi-track is that like I didn't just take the output of the board and run it into a recorder. What I have is a recording of the kick drum, and a recording of the snare drum, and of the bass, and of the guitar, and we're playing them all back at the same time. And I have control over what happens with all of those sounds, if I can find where my mix window went. There we go. So we can kind of simplify this down a little bit, and you can see that I've got things grouped up into categories. What Lauren was actually managing during the show did look remarkably similar to all of this. Oh, right, I'm on the, well, yeah, sure. We'll start with the dry version. So let's just basically do like what I would do during a sound check. And let's just kind of go channel by channel here, and let's listen to some things. So usual starting point is the kick drum. So right now I have nothing on this affected at all. So let's change that. So here it is with an equalizer put on it. You can see that I've kind of boosted up the high end, and what we're looking at here, there's a few things going on this graph. One is that as we look at this, what we're graphing here, the left side is the low frequencies, the right side is the high frequencies. This line that's moving is what it's detecting coming in through what would be the microphone, or in this case it's the recording. And this solid line with the little fill-ins is what I'm doing to the curve. So I'm taking, we'll look at like this blue region. I'm taking the area under this curve between about 300 hertz and what is that, like 6K-ish, and we're taking the volume on that and turning up just that section of frequencies. And then same up here in the purple applies from 4K on upward. So we're kind of making this shaped volume sort of. This is controlling the color of the sound is what we call it, or the timbre. So you can hear without it and with it. I think that still comes across okay on Zoom. It is kind of mangling the audio a little bit. Actually, I guess before I even dig into the EQ, we got another thing going on here first. The first thing that's happening is what we call an expander. So here's with it, without it. So you can hear that it's kind of cutting out some of the other stuff that's happening nearby, because the thing about drum kit mics is there's a whole bunch of stuff all there gathered in together, and everything's close together, and sound spills from one place to another, and it's a big old mess. It's hard to control. So if we put on an expander, or sometimes it's also known as a gate, they're similar but different. What that's doing is it's looking at the volume level that's coming in and saying, until you get up to a certain level, you don't get through. Once it goes above that threshold, then it opens up the mic and lets the audio pass through. So basically anything that's not the intended signal that's too quiet, it'll kind of help cut out. So again, with it, without it, and of course this stretch is kind of a bad example. And with it again. Then we'll put our EQ back on. So now we've got the expander and the EQ, so we've got it sort of tamed down to just the kick, and we've got some EQ on it. Now the next thing that I want to tackle is that sometimes the signal is going to be really loud if he's really beating on the kick, and sometimes if he's just kind of tapping, it's going to be quiet. And while that's sometimes helpful to have that dynamic range, it can also get really annoying when things like suddenly become really loud, and now I have to manage that in the mix, and that's work that I have to do. Well, what if I could automate that away? But I can. Here comes our next tool in the chain, called a compressor. All that this is doing is it's again looking at the volume coming in, and when it gets above a certain level, it just turns the volume down. And then we can take that signal, there's this knob that we call makeup gain, and what it does is that after the compressor has done its thing and it's been kind of going through and turning down the volume when it gets too loud, then we just take that output signal, because it's now quieter than it was before, and just take the whole thing and turn it back up again. So in effect, that takes the quiet sounds and makes them louder. So now the quiet and the loud are now closer together, making it easier to manage this signal. And we'll take him back to the beginning. And then this is just a little effect to kind of give the bass more bass. So I will not bore you with the full sound check here. Let's just take all of this as a given. And now we've got the whole drum kit. Voila, like magic, sound checked. But we listen to this and it's still kind of, oh, and then I can also take, because of the way that I've got things working here, will also not annoy you with that ongoing sound. So we have all of these drums. So then what I'm doing is I'm taking all of these signals and they get combined together to form the whole drum kit. I'm then taking that audio and taking it as a group and putting another compressor on it. So like, you know, if you've got multiple drums playing at the same time, that's going to still become louder than it was before. So, but that it wouldn't, any individual track wouldn't be able to keep track of that. So then I put another compressor on the group as a whole. And so that just kind of helps tame that, and we can see here how these compressors are working, that the blue graph is the level that it sees coming in, and the white graph is the amount that it's turning the volume down by. And that one's just kind of lightweight. It's not really doing a whole lot, just kind of helps tighten things up a little bit. But we're still kind of dry and crunchy, and it's maybe not particularly interesting, even though it sounds correct. So let's throw a little bit of an effect on. Ah, we have reverb now. We're in a space. Too much. Let's bring it back to a sane level. So, without it, and with it. So now we're starting to get somewhere. Have I lost you so far?
Nah, I didn't realize it took this long to like do all this.
So you have actors on stage during sound check and they're like, oh god, how long do I have to sing? This feels like forever. In reality, it's like, I don't know, 45 seconds a minute the first time out. But it truly does feel like an eternity on stage, and I can sympathize with that. But when you see what all's going back in the booth during that time, you're like, oh wow, you're doing all of that in that little amount of time? Yes. Although really during
If I were you guys, I would in fact yell at actors. Yes.
Yep. This is why sound people get cranky sometimes. But even though we go through all of that during sound check, really during sound check, what I'm mostly doing is just kind of getting it close enough and going like, okay, like this is a particularly egregious frequency. I'm gonna notch that out a little bit. I'm gonna kind of tighten up the compressor a little bit, and then I wait until we get into rehearsal and we start hearing people together, and then you kind of start to think of things as a group. So like, let's look at a vocal track. I'm mostly gonna be nice to people here, and I'm not gonna solo out tracks of people who wouldn't want to be heard on their own. But I think that Callista has earned it here.
Goodbye, Father Zeus.
So this is
Thank you for the
just
grace to
Callista's
know
track.
the Xanadu.
Oh, whoops.
A place where
So we're gonna do
nobody's
kind of the same thing
ever
with her. She's got an open mic in a
the
theater.
love that we
There's
came
other
to
stuff going on
know.
around her. We want to get
They
rid of some of
call
that.
it Xanadu.
So here's the expander. When she's not singing, it closes up to help get rid of some of the other stuff.
You open your
Uh,
eyes to see.
This is an exciter. I've been playing with these a little more kind of lately. What it does is it takes that idea of the harmonics and it just kind of looks at what signal's there and it adds more harmonics onto the top of it. It does what we call brightening the sound. Anytime something has more harmonics and it goes up higher, we call it brighter. And when it has fewer harmonics and they don't go up as high, it's darker. So those may be words that you hear me use from time to time.
What we have made is real.
So you can kind of hear
We are
without it.
Xanadu.
We'll get to a point where you can actually hear it.
A million
Without it.
lights are dancing and
With
there
it.
you are, a shooting star, an everlasting
Also that fan though.
world, and you're here
It actually did a pretty good job of keeping it out of the signal. And then same ordeal, because sometimes she's quiet, sometimes she's loud. I want to manage that a little more. I'm gonna turn down my master level here a little bit so that I can talk over.
Now we are here in Xanadu.
So here's our compressor,
Xanadu, your neon
and you can actually see here
lights
most of the time it's not actually even touching it. The level's not getting up to its point. But you can hear when she really starts belting it, you see it dip down, it's turning down the volume a little bit when she gets loud.
You needed the world to know they are in
Then we're gonna EQ. And the EQ on her's not real extreme. It didn't need much. So there's without it and with it. It actually hardly does anything at all. Most of what I'm doing is boosting up the high end because I want kind of the breath and air in the signal. And then this is a de-esser, which we can think of this as sort of like a compressor that's combined with one little piece of an EQ. So again, when things get too loud, it turns the volume down, but it's not looking at the whole signal. It only looks for the really high frequencies up in what we call the sibilants, which are things like S's and T's. and sometimes Z's, things that they produce a lot of high-end noise. They can get downright painful when they're too high, but at the same time, when they're quieter, that's when you get sort of that breath and air in the signal of like, and so we want to keep them when they're quiet, and we want to cut them down when they're loud, and so that's what the de-esser does. So again, without it, what's a good passage for this? Because you kind of have to be in the right place for it. And again, you can see what it's doing. This red meter here is where it's turning the volume down. Ooh, dance break. Not getting. Oh, not yet. And if I take this up to an extreme, you can actually give people a lisp. Ah, that's the dance break. A million lights. And that's how you know that you've taken a de-esser too far. Because it's just really crunching down on that high end whenever it actually comes in. Okay, so now we've done a handful of tracks here. I'm gonna go into my second oven here and prepare and take out the one that we prepared earlier. I guess I didn't really need to save that, but whatever. And now we have the finished version. So that is a big part of what the audio engineer does. It's not the whole job, but that's pretty much it. Anything that you guys want to look at more, anything you still you feel like I might have skipped over? Nope, okay. So let's see, who else do we have here? Oh, so show control. We will open up my good buddy QLab here. Sure, let's just start from a new blank file. So when we first introduced QLab to people, and even back when I was in college and I was first introduced to it, I was like, okay, so like, what even is this? Like, it's part of a sound class, so like it's a sound thing, right? Is this like playback? Like, why don't I just do this in iTunes? I can just put all of my sound effects in and hit play when it's time to go. Well, let's look at some examples again here. Let's just kind of build a fake show here. So I'm going to bring in a music track. First, let me make sure that my audio devices are set up correctly, and they're not. We'll adjust level. Actually, here, I'm going to do this at the... Oh, right, I can do it at the mixer because I'm doing that. All right, so let's say that we've got a scene where there's music playing, and then let's say that we have a knock at the door. I'll let you see what's happening on my other screen here. Oh, right. Because I've forgotten my password for that site and haven't had a chance to reset it yet. So let's just do a little search here. Kill that for the moment. Yeah, okay, sure. Doorbell works. That's close enough to a knock, right? Alright, so now as my next cue, we'll keep up with ourselves with cue labeling here. So let's say we have our example scene where we've got music playing in the background, and then the doorbell rings. Now, if I were just playing this in iTunes, I wouldn't be able to play both of those tracks at the same time. One would stop for the next one. But we can also get a little more detailed than that. Like, as we listen to this, the doorbell's there, but like, it could be more prominent. I can't really hear it that well with the music playing. So here's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to say, I want to turn this music down. Let's say by like 9 dB. And then after the doorbell's done ringing, then I want to turn the music back up. So now in sequence, that's music turns down. Ooh, let's speed that up. Yeah, let's put it back where it was. Okay, so in sequence, we have music down, doorbell rings, music turns back up. Okay, that's cool that I can put this all on the list, but like, that's all one action. Why don't I, like, can I put all of those together? I can. So I'm going to link these together with what QLab calls an auto follow, and you can see this little icon over here changing. We've got two kind of follow-on behaviors. One is called auto continue, the other is called auto follow. Continue means that the two cues are going to happen at the same time. Auto follow means that it's going to wait for one cue to finish and then automatically move on to the next one. So now here back in context again, I've put all of these down into a group. There's a lot of tail on that doorbell. And that's okay, because I can just trim off the end of it. So now let's try that again. And we can even make this a little more extreme of a change so that it's a little more obvious to hear. Oop. Okay, cool. So that's our scene. But eventually it's going to have to come to an end. But we don't necessarily know how long it's going to take for like actors to make it through all their lines. Like it's asking too much of them to try to match up their scene timing with just like ambient music. If it's a musical, that's one thing, but if it's just music playing in the background, they need to do their scene at their pace. It's our responsibility to keep up with them. So we need to create ourselves a couple of options so that this scene can last for as long or as short as it needs to. Because you'll also notice that I didn't just like embed the doorbell file into the music where like it has to happen at an exact time. I can fire that cue whenever. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this song onto loop. Not that we've encountered this problem yet in this demo, but if it should happen to reach the end of the song, skip ahead, it'll loop back to the beginning and start over again. So now this can just loop forever. But then, if it's looping forever, how do I end the scene? Well, what I can do is I'm going to create another fade cue, and we're going to say that we're going to fade it all the way down, and then check this box that says stop. Now what that's going to do, let's take our whole scene in sequence here. Music starts. And then the actors can go through their lines however long it needs to take them. We can wait. The music dips down, the doorbell rings, music comes back up, and then the actors can continue. They can do their thing however long they need to. This music can loop 10 times if it needs to, but then whenever the scene's over and we're ready to move on, now it fades it all the way out and stops. So that's kind of the like introduction to QLab and like kind of the little basic starting of what it can do. There's also other things that we can do with it. And actually, if I open Logic back up, let's kind of make something up here. And we'll see if I can remember how to do this off the top of my head. Ah, okay, I sure can. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go in QLab, and also going to make sure that I have a certain system setting turned on here. Sure do. He's turned on. So, yep, there I am. So I'm going to make a MIDI cue here. Now MIDI was a protocol made back in the 70s for electronic musical instruments. So like my little keyboard here is a MIDI control surface. And it sends things like note on, note off. That means that like you pushed a key on the keyboard or you let go of a key on the keyboard. But then they also added things like what we call velocity, which is how hard did you press the key. Or like this surface has knobs on it, and we can send like how much did you turn one of those knobs and things like that. Well, now I guess it still gets used for musical instruments, but we've kind of co-opted it for show control, that we can send those same signals, and I can tell QLab to say, like, pretend that you're a keyboard and that you've pushed the C3 key. And then I can go in Logic or on the QL console like we have at West, and I can just send a signal over. Maybe. I know I did this once, and I wasn't super thrilled with how it worked in Logic, but maybe. Aha. Nope, that's not what I want. I want the IAC driver. Okay, I may not be able to make this work, but oh, actually, I have a different example. We're gonna call up a different idea here. I'm opening up an app called LightKey, which is a Mac-based light controller. And don't update now. And I'm gonna open up the real-world light show from my wedding. And we're also going to open up the QLab file from there.
So are you saying you light designed your own wedding?
Yes, I did. Ironically, my entire side of the wedding party were all like my AV crew regulars.
Oh,
So they were all on the stage. The person running AV wasn't even an AV person. I wrote the whole thing in QLab and showed her the go button.
oh my gosh. You know, it's funny because I've been like thinking about lighting for my wedding too, and I'm all like, so many possibilities, but
so let's see, we'll fix my audio patch here. That should... Oh dang, I didn't bundle my session and the audio files are gone. But the MIDI link should still be working, so if I... Aha, it sure does. Okay, let's shrink these up as much as I can and still get them to fit on the display. Also, yes, I had a Harry Potter wedding.
I love that.
I really wish that the audio files were still linked here because it was so cool. But so what I've got going on here, you'll notice I'm not really clicking anything in LightKey over here. But as I come over in QLab, I've got like these light cues, and they're a MIDI cue. This is just sending a signal over to LightKey that says fire whatever cue. And if I remember right, that was a pretty subtle one. That was nothing. Oh yeah, this was like a whole thing. And you can kind of see the visualization changing. I kind of had some effects going on there. Where was... Oh, it's in the recessional. We did this cool, like, the officiant ended with 50... it was 50 points to Slytherin because we're both Slytherins. And so I had this little, like, chase at the end that, like, as he waved his wand in the air, the lights all went green around the room. But all of this, if I had the music's files linked, which, as I say that, let me look real quick and see if I actually do have them, and I can just do like a couple of quick relinks here. If I hit download here, that should relink when it gets finished downloading. So here we go with context. And all of that's automated. So all that Ashley had to do at the time, I had all of this stuff hidden. Oops. So this was all that Ashley was looking at during the show. So she just fired recessional, and that does music, lights, everything. But then when you look down inside, these are all separate elements. And so it's just kind of taking all of these little commands and little actions like playing a sound or turning down volume or firing a cue and grouping them together in useful ways. And you can really go nuts with this if you want to. There are, like, how the theater has the Prodigy flies for the electrics. There's an interface module for those that you can tie it in with QLab and you can control your flies remotely. So there's no fly crew. It just, when the cue goes, stuff flies in. And there's all kinds of safety interlocks and stuff involved with that. But there are some shows where there's only one AV guy, and usually he sits in the booth with his feet propped up. He's basically just there in case anything goes wrong, and the whole show just runs on time code. Or sometimes you can do it with like a stage manager that instead of telling people to go, they just have the go button, and everything just happens when they push go. That's a lot of setup in advance, especially when you're doing something as complicated as a musical, where, let's see if I can find any of our bundled files. I don't remember how many cues we've ended up with on some of our more recent shows. Do I have... Somewhere I found that I had an actual bundle. And of course, when I actually care to look at it, I can't find it. That's how this always goes. Yeah. But yeah, sound crew ends up... I forget, Riley and Issa, you guys have worked on lighting crew before?
I've never worked on lighting or sound. I just thought it sounded cool.
Okay, that's cool.
I was a mic master for...
Oh, duh. I should know that. You worked on my crew. The mic masters are unfortunately easily forgotten because they live over in the dark, and they tend to be pretty hands off. Like, you know what you need to do, and you don't require a lot of instruction from me, so you can just kind of do your thing. It was the same way with my regular mic master during college. He had his basket of batteries and tape and other goodies, and he ran around and just fixed things so that I didn't have to worry about it. And if you've done your job well, then yeah, we kind of forget that you exist, which is also true of the audio engineer. If you've done your job well, the audience won't realize that you've actually done anything because it just sounds like it's supposed to be there. And speaking of, I think we're going to time this out about perfect. The last role was the mic master. And this one is going to be back to the PowerPoint because this gets a little more, I don't have all of the pieces that, I have some pieces and taken apart mics sitting around me here, but they're not always that visually telling. Images sometimes work better. So, a microphone is a transducer. Well, what the heck does that mean? Those are certainly all words, but not a lot of meaning. A transducer, basically, here's the real definition of it, but effectively, all that means is that it's a device that takes one form of energy and converts it into another. So in this case, we're taking the kinetic energy of those little microscopic winds pushing back and forth and moving things into an electrical signal. And then we can take that electrical signal and we can affect it and we can amplify it. So one of the things that, in our case, we don't have a whole lot, well, okay, it's not entirely true. We don't have a ton of options with what mics we have available to use. Like, especially when it comes to, like, actor miking, we have the Shure Countryman lookalikes, but that's really the only option that we've got. When it comes to miking the band, we've got a closet, and we have some options there. So what goes into the decision of deciding which microphone to use for any given thing? And there's a few things that we're going to look at. There's the type of transducer that's in the mic, its polar pattern, its frequency response, and in some cases its physical size. Like in the case of actor mics, you really need to have like those itsy bitsy teeny tiny sub-miniature microphones because it's going to go on their face and it's going to be visible. Where in the case of like with the band or the orchestra, if I'm miking amps, it doesn't really matter if I have this kind of like big chunky mic put in front of it because it's hidden off in the corner and nobody really cares. So there's a few different types of transducers that you're going to find in microphones. There are others technically, but the main ones that you're going to encounter are dynamic mics, condenser mics, and ribbon mics. And they all do the same thing, but they do it in different ways. So what we're trying to do here again is take movement energy and convert it into electricity. There's one way that we can do that. Remember back in science class when you were in grade school, you probably did an experiment where you wrap a bunch of wire around a nail and then hook it up to a battery and it becomes a magnet. Well, the same thing happens in reverse as well. If you take that coil of wire and you wave it in front of a magnet, it's going to produce a small electrical current. And that's how a dynamic mic works. Dynamic mics are, like I have one here. The classic example is the Shure SM58, which is like the classic, like, you know, ice cream cone shaped silver ball on the top microphone. At West, we have, I forget what the model number is. It's kind of a newer variant of that is our handheld wireless mics. But what's going on in here, if I take the cap off, this one unfortunately is not very visibly revealing. Really, all you can really see is that we've got a couple of wires going in here. But inside, there's a magnet, and there's a coil of wire wrapped around it with just a little bit of space so that it can move. And then that coil of wire, actually here, better photo on the next slide. We'll just toggle back and forth between these two. Here's our dynamic mic. You got a clear piece of plastic on top. That's what we call the diaphragm. That's the thing that catches the wind and gets blown back and forth. This little silver donut in the middle is a magnet. And this red coil here is the voice coil, or it's a coil of wire. And then that's connected to some other circuitry down below that amplifies it and gets it to a usable signal. So what this is basically doing is you've got that coil of wire that's waving back and forth in front of a magnet, and it just creates a small electrical current. Well, then the next most common one, the nice thing about dynamics is that they're simple. They don't require any kind of external power, and they're pretty robust. The Shure SM57 is known as the hammer mic because one of their famous demos for the durability of it is they'll take the mic, they'll unplug it, they'll hammer in a nail with it, and then plug it back in, and it's working just fine. But they are not necessarily the most sensitive mics. They don't necessarily capture a lot of, especially when it comes to like those higher frequencies, brighter, like breathier sounds. They kind of miss out on a lot of that because you've got all of the mass of that voice coil and the whole diaphragm that you have to move, and it doesn't like to move fast. So that's where condenser mics come in, which if we look at a real one here, and in fact, I have another one taken apart here, but the image again is better. So you can kind of see a few components here. What you've got in front is there's this piece of plastic that's got a thin film of metal on it. And then behind that is this plate with all the holes in it. That's called the back plate. And they're sitting very close together, but just spaced out a little bit. This outer ring is electrically connected to the metal that's on that layer of plastic. And basically what it's doing is there's an electrical measurement that it can take that it can determine how close together the diaphragm and the backplate are. So as the diaphragm gets blown around by the tiny wind, it's going to push in and it's going to pull away, and it's going to get closer to the backplate and it's going to get farther away. And as it measures that capacitance, it can generate a signal from it. Now, the nice thing about this is that you'll notice that there's not anything attached to that diaphragm. Sometimes there's a screw terminal in the middle of it, like in this case. We've got a screw in the middle, but they don't always have that. And even when they do, that will only really affect one frequency out of the whole range of the mic. The rest is free to flap around. But because it's got less mass to move around, it can capture those higher frequencies better. What I'm using here is a large condenser diaphragm, or a large diaphragm condenser mic. Now, the downside of these is that they're more complicated. You can see that as opposed to just a couple of wires connected to like a transformer, we got a whole circuit board here. There's a lot going on. There's more things to break. This requires power from the outside, which generally we supply by what's called phantom power, which is a way of the mixer to send that voltage over the same cable that carries the audio signal and allows it to power the mic from it. So pros and cons. These also can get really teeny tiny. Like the mics that we put on actors generally are condenser mics, because they can shrink them down teeny tiny, and then you can take all of that circuitry and you can put it at the other end of a wire that goes off somewhere else. Like in the case of the ones that we use, it's actually in the mic pack. And then the last type of mic, which actually is the oldest variety, the first mics ever created were ribbon mics. But we still see them in use because they still are some pretty good sounding mics. The problem is that they're delicate. But basically, the way that this works, it's the same principle as the dynamic mic, except instead of having a bunch of coils of wire, you've got just this thin foil sheet that's been corrugated so that it can kind of stretch and bend. And that's suspended in the middle of a magnet. So then, same thing, that when sound comes in and the wind blows, that ribbon can flap back and forth, and it waves in between the two magnets, and it creates an electrical current, which then gets amplified and sent out to other places. So once we've got that decided, one of the other things that we need to think about is what we call the polar pattern of the mic, and that's what direction does it pick up. So in the case of just about every mic over in my case, most of them are what we call a cardioid mic, which is this pattern here. That basically means that it picks up whatever's in front of it, and it ignores stuff behind it. And there's physics things that make that work, and like holes that are put in encasements, and all kinds of cool stuff like that that people smarter than me figured out a long time ago. And now we can make microphone capsules that pick up in whatever direction you want. The main ones that you're going to run into out in the wild are a cardioid, is probably the most common. Second most common is an omnidirectional. That just picks up in every direction. There's a figure 8, which just about any ribbon mic is going to be a figure 8. It just means that it picks up what's in front of it, what's behind it, but not off to the sides. Or the probably the most interesting of the bunch, which I happen to have one here, is a shotgun mic, which is this pattern down here. It picks up, these are mostly used in film audio, and it's the one that you see the guy on the long pole carrying.
The boom guy.
The boom guy, yep. Famous pink shorts Star Wars boom guy. So here's what's going on inside of the boom. This is the actual microphone. It's this long, skinny guy. And this has an interference tube on the end that, because of the way and the placement of how these vents are cut into it, it causes the sound waves to interact with each other and cancel each other out when they come in from certain angles, which is why you get kind of this funky pattern, because it'll pick up a little bit from directly behind it, and it'll kind of get some from exactly to the side, but it mostly gets what's pointed directly in front of it. Like I said, people smarter than me figured this out a long time ago, and now we can control it. And the last thing that we're really going to think about is the frequency response of a mic. Now, I'm going to leave the lecture on resonance for a physics professor, because to be honest, I don't understand it all that well, but the thing to take away is that everything in the world has at least one resonant frequency, generally more than one. But that's just a frequency that, because of its size and mass and shape, that it wants to vibrate at. And that includes the diaphragm of the mic is going to have frequencies that it really likes to vibrate at. And so therefore those frequencies are going to be perceived louder when it comes through the mic. So with most mics, you're going to get, like, in the box with it, usually printed on a piece of paper, or you can search them online. You're going to get two graphs. One is going to look like this, and one is going to look like this. The polar pattern diagram is going to tell you what direction it picks up from. This is going to tell you the frequency response. So, like, in this example, they've got a few different mics plotted here that, like, the purple mic doesn't really have a lot in the way of low end. And so if I come over to my mixer here and make a valiant effort to navigate the menu while speaking. Let's see, channel 3. Interesting. I wonder why I did that. So that mic is going to sound a little something like this. The red mic, it's got more of a boomy bass. So, I see why I did what I did. That's because the EQ is not even turned on. Let's try now. Okay, so the purple mic, see if I can make an extreme version of this, is going to sound something kind of like this. I wish that I could make a more extreme EQ curve on my mixer, but we're a little lacking in the low end. Like, you wouldn't want to mic like a kick drum or a bass with this, but like for vocals, it would probably be fine because nothing happens down in this range except for wind noise. If I take my pop filter out of the way, when you get into plosive sounds like P's and B's, then, and man, this is actually rejecting it really well. But that's when you get those loud pops that are really distracting and awful. And so we want to avoid those. So why not just use a microphone that doesn't really pick them up all that well to begin with? Versus the red line is going to have more bottom end, more bass. And especially if I get up close to the mic and start enacting the proximity effect, you're really going to notice that there's a lot going on in the bass. And it may be too much, or it may be what you're looking for, depending on just what you're trying to mic. And then lastly, we have that blue line, which is kind of lacking in high end. And if I sort of cut this region, you'll notice that now my voice isn't as clear. You don't really get the sibilance as much. You've kind of lost that breathy and airy quality versus if I bring it back in, and I can even boost it so that it's more prominent. All of that can be affected just by not even using EQ, because this is basically an EQ graph, but just based on the physics of the microphone alone to start you out closer to where you want to be, just depending on what tools you have available to you. And, as expected, I ended up pretty much right on time. Any other questions? Any other curiosities?
I have a question about Logic Pro.
Okay.
Is that a paid service or is it free? Do they have an educational license?
Okay, so I actually just looked into this because I still have access to my student email.
Oh, yay.
There is a student deal, but it's not a great student deal. Now, Logic is it's Mac only, but it's $200. You buy it one time, it's yours. And they've been working on
awesome.
the version for quite a while, and they seem committed to continuing to support the version that's currently out in the wild versus like Adobe that eventually quit and started doing subscription, and now the version that you paid for is no good anymore. So yeah, you buy it, $200, it's yours. The student deal is that it's still $200, but you also get Final Cut, Motion Compressor, and Main Stage with it, which is like $1,000 worth of apps for $200. And I would totally take them up on it if I didn't already own every other piece of software in the bundle. So, there's that. Yeah, I'm still running on my trial of Logic Pro for now, but they're getting my money. I used to be a Pro Tools guy, and then because gosh, if you want to start an argument between music producers, start talking audio editors with them. Yeah, the long and short of it is that I really liked Pro Tools, but they also moved over to a subscription model, and my existing license stopped being any good. And I got stuck on a project that I already wasn't making any money on, faced with a potential expense on that, and it really just put a bad taste in my mouth. So I'm kind of done with Pro Tools now. I defended them for a long time, and now I can't do it anymore. So I'm switching over to Logic. I picked it up really quick. It's the most Pro Tools-like of any DAW that I've found so far. General term for an audio editor, we call it a DAW, or a digital audio workstation. Not sure how that term came to be as opposed to an editor, but we just call it a DAW. There's a lot of others out there. They work in different ways, especially when it comes to things like routing. So like if I wanted to, I could theoretically run a show on this. It would be kind of miserable, but it would be possible. Because like I can go in and I can say like I want this to go to a different output. So like I could have monitors hooked in where I'm doing like other mixes for ears and whatnot, and I can send things out to other places. There's some DAWs where like you have to go into a menu for that, and there's some where like you're drawing lines from one side of the screen to the other. In this case, it's a drop down, so like kind of some basics of signal flow here. Like I've got my band here, and you'll notice that all of these on their output are marked as bus 8. Well, a bus is just a way of getting audio from one place to another within the same piece of equipment, application, whatever. Well, then up here on the input line, you'll see that this band group has bus 8 as its input. So it's going out through bus 8 and coming here. Everything that goes out to bus 8 gets mixed together, comes in bus 8 here, and now I can treat the sum of bus 8 as its own thing here, and then ultimately that goes out to stereo out. But if I wanted to, I could send this through another bus to go do another thing and get sent somewhere else. And that was the main thing that brought me back to Logic. It was because it's got the flow most similar to what I'm accustomed to.
Sorry, Issa, I know I kind of overshadowed your question there. You can go ask a question now, sorry.
Such a simple.
That's mean, but I forgive you. Okay, it's kind of a question for Miss Morris. Sorry, Josh, but you said you were trying to find sound for your wedding. Are you engaged and you didn't tell me?
Oh no, did you not tell them?
I didn't tell anyone. No, I didn't tell any of the students, but most of them figured it out. Like,
It was on social media, so
whose social media?
no, I'm not sure. I just know my mom or my sister saw it on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, because I think it was Kayla Tappan, because she's friends with me now that she's graduated, and so she posted something. And yes, I am engaged. I never thought I would be, but here I am. It's one of those moments where it's like, oh, you survived quarantine, and that means something. So
Oh yeah, so I got married, and then the next day gatherings were restricted to 50.
No way.
As we were doing the whole set, we were like, hey, should we still do this? We didn't know then what we know now. A, should we still do this? And B, are we going to get mandated? And so as we were going through 3 days of set, we were just preparing to take it all back down.
Oh my gosh. Where was your venue?
In Independence, it was his parents' church.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
Let me find
any sound questions?
Oh. Since we're doing virtual, so we can't really use the school microphones, do you still have a mic person? What's going on there?
I'm still working on that part. No, there will probably not be a mic master. They don't really have a ton to do on this one. The actors are still going to have their AirPods, which hopefully we get that worked out now that that's apparently an issue.
I don't think. Oh yeah, Riley does know about that. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's so nice. You got so many candles up there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was a task.
You got some gobos on the wall.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome.
But yeah, no, we're probably not going to have a mic master on this show. Brock and I are still working on, because here's the thing, is that yes, this is our first time doing this way. It's everyone else's first time doing it too. Brock and I, so Brock is, if you guys haven't met him I forget if you guys are in the Kodachrome production or not, but
Riley is, yeah.
Okay. Brock is long-term my partner in crime. He was, speaking of the wedding, he was my best man, and in his speech, he said something like, we've been partners in crime for a long time, mostly figuratively, sometimes finding the line. But we work at a company that does broadcast transport, so basically we get TV from one place to another. So for example, we carry American Idol. So on the American Idol set, there's a box that they send their final video output to, and from there it hits the internet, and then it's our responsibility to make sure that it makes it to every Fox affiliate station in the country, where it actually goes out through their antennas and gets broadcast locally and over cable and whatnot. But we get it from one place to another. And we're also dealing with, everyone is trying to figure out how to do TV remote as well. And so what we're bringing in here is a lot of the same tools as what some of the bigger dogs are also doing and figuring out all at the same time. That said, we still haven't figured out a lot of how to get more than one person to, because, so for example, we're running everything through vMix, both for audio and video. And so both the video people and the audio people both have to be able to touch vMix at the same time, but it's only on one computer. So we're still working on things like that and how things are going to get controlled. We know that there are ways. We just have to figure out what is going to be the best way for us.
So is it a matter of like it has to be on one computer, or could they both run, if it was on two computers, could it be run by two different?
No, because, well, I mean, it'll only be on one computer anyway, because there's only one show and there's one output and one view.
Oh, okay.
That said, we can have multiple computers that have things like how I showed the control signals in QLab, how it can command other devices. vMix is capable of receiving commands from other applications, and so we can use things like QLab to trigger those kinds of things happening without actually being screen shared to vMix.
Oh, this is gonna be complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
We're gonna.
Thank you so much, Josh. I learned a lot in this. I feel embarrassed that I didn't know any of this stuff, but
Way when I learned a lot of this in college.
yeah, maybe I should have taken a sound class or something. But
Yep.
I feel like I sorely missed out on all that knowledge. So, yeah. But anyway, you guys, say thank you to Josh. That was awesome. And thanks for spending your Friday night part of it with us. And Issa, get yourself back in our theater world, okay?
You got it.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Yeah.
On the masterclass, the next one you have, is that going to be just like this, or is it going to go more in depth?
So it's probably going to go more towards video and streaming, and we're probably going to bring Brock in on that one.
Okay.
So different stuff. Not the exact same thing. So you better come back.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll send you some additional resources, mostly YouTube videos that kind of go deeper on stuff that you want to explore.
Watch that Tom Scott video. I love him.
Mm-hmm.
He's just real nice.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a great rest of your weekend. And I'll see you Monday, probably.
Yeah.
Well, except for Issa.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry, Issa.
Thank
All right. Bye, you guys. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.